Welcome back to Philosophy 102, Introduction to Philosophy. Great thinkers. We're going to kind of address now the ideas and themes of this class instead of just kind of going over the syllabus like you saw in that last video. So the first thing we really need to talk about is just what is philosophy? What does this mean? What does the word mean, right? We're in an introduction to philosophy class. That should be kind of the first thing that we introduce. And really, we need to understand what this term is, that this term has meaning. And it's kind of divided into two very simple spots. The first half, philo, and the second part, Sophie. If we want to understand these words, then we can understand what philosophy is, or at least begin to understand what philosophy is. Sophie is wisdom. So whatever it is that we're trying to do is something that is based on ideas of wisdom, that we're connected to something big and great and wise. For some, wisdom is a personified being. Many of the Greeks it was, many of the moderns it's not. Depends on where you are within this idea. But Sophie is this idea of at least that it is wisdom. So we need to philos or Sophie. Philos is one of those standard common Greek words for love. Now, Greeks actually had multiple words for love, and this kind of makes sense, is when we say the term love, we don't always mean the same thing. If you say that you love pizza and you love your parents, you don't mean the same thing from that. They've got different connotations, different weights, different expectations. The standard Greek understanding of love was that there's three different categories, as it were. One would be eros, right? I love pizza. I eros pizza because of what I get from it. It tastes good, it nourishes my body, etc., etc., right? So it's only about what I'm getting out of it. Pizza doesn't require anything from me. I don't give anything back to pizza. I might buy it and give something to somebody else, but I don't, owe anything to a personified notion of pizza. On the other end is this notion of agape, which the ancient Greeks kind of belittled as kind of a womanish, for their understanding, or motherly idea. In agape, we kind of see this idea of selfless love. This idea of love that's only giving, and regardless of what it gets. So, a typical understanding of what a motherly love is supposed to be, right? That you love your child, even if your child is not loving back, even if it's inconsiderate, even if it's rude and mean. The idea is that you're still loving, you're emptying of yourself in this love for this other thing. But we don't do that with wisdom. We're not giving of ourselves, nor are we just taking it. There's middle term, philos, we'll end up getting the notion of Philadelphia, which is the city of brotherly love. Out of this is the philos is a brotherly love, what the Greeks saw as largely one of the highest. It's not common, it's not just about what you take, and it's not selfless, it's not just what you give, but there's a give and a take for philosophy. Your love of wisdom for philosophy is one that requires you to give up something, but it is something that you get in return, and therefore both sides should gain from this exchange. And hopefully that's the case as we go through this semester. You're going to give of some of yourself. You're going to give of some of your time. You're going to give of some of your thoughts as you ponder ideas, or read something, or engage with another student on an idea. And yet this wisdom is going to return. It's going to come back. It's going to give you something. You're going to gain greater understanding of the world, the nature of the universe, or something, depending on who it is that we're reading and discussing. And so this is what we're trying to do. This is what philosophy is, and this is what this class is dedicated to, is this idea of a mutual love where we all move and grow in wisdom. Now, because wisdom requires that you give something for it to give you something back, we have to kind of have a different sort of mindset, that we have to be open to being challenged in here. This is why I have you read a modified version of the University of Chicago and their admittance letter to students. This class will follow this same sort of idea, where we have a commitment to freedom of inquiry and expression. You have to be able to put yourself out there to be able to get something back. You have to be challenged and lose something to gain more out of that experience, right? There's not going to be a safe space from ideas. We can't move aside from that and engage with these ideas. There aren't going to be trigger warnings on ideas, because all ideas should be challenging. Some ideas are going to be more so, and this class is, we're reading great philosophers and great thinkers. There's not going to be so many things that should cause alarm, although there will be ideas that are different than yours, and your fellow classmates will have ideas that are different than yours, and should express these. We have this commitment to academic freedom. That means we're not going to try to put ideas away, but we're going to try to encourage this, challenge you, and maybe even sometimes cause you discomfort or offense, and that is okay. You might walk out of that being offended and say, you know what, I'm actually right. This idea is wrong, and now that we've all seen it, I know it better, and I know it's wrong. Or you might say, you know what, I was wrong. I thought I had it right, and I'm glad I was challenged by this, and even though it caused me discomfort, I'm now wiser. I've engaged with wisdom and can kind of emerge from that. And really, this is the idea of what we're wanting to do, is we're wanting to foster a free exchange of ideas in support of a diversity of opinion and background that's really fundamental to strengthening our community and ourselves as individuals in our community. The only thing that is not, quote, allowed in this class would be some sort of universalizing statement that is used to shut down other thoughts, expressions, and ideas. In this class, when we're wrestling with ideas, like, nothing should be seen as impossible, other than maybe a logical contradiction that you can address and maybe see why it is, and maybe, again, be right and maybe be wrong. You don't have the right to put somebody out and say that they can't talk about something because they lack experience or anything else, right? This is the opportunity for us to discuss this, and that's how you learn from these experiences. No one's ideas are inherently invalid, not yours nor your classmates. You might be wrong, and oftentimes we all are wrong, but that doesn't mean that your ideas are inherently invalid. Now, one of the interesting ideas along this was argued by Alexander Solzhenitsyn in his Harvard speech. And he says, quote, "Without any censorship in the West, fashionable trends of thought and ideas are carefully separated from those which are not fashionable. Nothing is forbidden, but what is not fashionable will hardly ever find its way into the periodicals or books or be heard in colleges. Legally, your researches are free, but they are conditioned by the fashion of the day." He delivered this in June of 1978 at Harvard. For those of you unfamiliar with Solzhenitsyn, Nobel Prize for his work Gulag Archipelago. He suffered under the Soviet Union and eventually found his way to America before returning to Russia after the fall of communism. The idea here is that we need to learn to ask ourselves very important questions. Questions that might not even be fashionable, as one fashionable idea today might be out of fashion tomorrow. Something that might be unthinkable might be commonplace, and then back to unthinkable. This is kind of the history of ideas over and over again. Most of us would be appalled at the Greeks' idea of not paying attention to women's ideas and kind of pushing that out in some ways, or not wanting to read biographies of anything, including your childhood, because if you're important, you'll be important when you're an adult. I don't care about your childhood, was the fashion of the day. Today, most biographies about people include long sections about their childhood because we believe this might help shape who they were and those decisions that they make. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. And different fashions on how you're going to address an idea will kind of come in and come out. We need to challenge ourselves, which is going to require that we separate what is fashionable from what is real. What ideas are significant and important because we're trying to figure out what things are. You need to feel free to question the prevailing doxa, the zeitgeist of the day, in order to actually learn and move forward. This is why we cannot have the safe spaces before, and that you should, in fact, be triggered in some ways, but always remain respectful of others in class. Understand that you might disagree with somebody, you disagree with their ideas, they're not inherently evil for having a different view than you. One side of whatever debate doesn't have to be evil. Sometimes they can just be wrong, or sometimes the truth might be in between and neither of you might be right. This is the way that we learn, is through this dialogue, and this is what we're trying to move forward with that. At this point, you should generally be thinking of different questions you would have about this class and introducing yourself. I encourage all of you in the week's dialogue that you're going to be doing to answer the question of who you are. Introduce yourself to your fellow classmates. And maybe even with this, mention a little bit of maybe who's your favorite philosopher if you have one, right? This is a great thinkers class. We're going to be addressing many different great thinkers. Do you have somebody you like? Do you have somebody you gravitate to? It might be somebody that I love. It might be somebody that I dislike. And it's okay for you to dislike them if I like them, or to like them if I dislike them, and same with everybody else. There's different strengths and weaknesses. Everything's a trade-off. There's no definitive answer as to who you should like more than somebody else. And some of you might say, this is an introduction class. I don't know. I don't have this familiarity with it, and that's why I'm taking the class. And that's also perfectly valid and fantastic as well. So I encourage you all, once again, to introduce yourself in the discussion board moving forward. Kind of furthering ourselves with this discussion, we need to look at kind of the difference in the realm of the higher ideas. This is really kind of comes about with Plato's notion and his allegory of the cave, which I recommend you read today. And here he's going to say that there's a difference between appearances and reality. That reality is beyond our mere appearance of something, that there is something deeper within all of that. So I would first encourage you all to pause and get out a piece of paper. I know you're sitting at your screens and you probably don't have that right now, but go ahead and do all of that. Once you have your piece of paper, you can resume. All right, you've got it, I assume. So fold it in half and then fold it in half again. So you're going to have a sheet of paper that looks kind of like this, that you have 4 different sections on this. All right, now you've got that done. Let's move forward. Now I want you to think of yourself and what you look like, right? There's nobody you're more familiar with than you. You see yourself every single day, and you know what you look like. So in the first square, I want you to draw a picture of you. You've got there, right? Draw a picture of yourself. Go ahead and pause this and make sure you've got it all there. Give yourself enough time. Right? If this needs to take 20 minutes because you're a great artist, go ahead. If you are like, okay, so do. All right, now you've drawn yourself in square one. How did it come out? Did you like it? You know yourself better than anybody else. You think you did a perfectly adequate job? You snap a picture of this and send it off to your parents and go, look, it's me. And they'll go, indeed it is. Or are they going to go, maybe. All right, how are we going to look at this and address this? All right, in square two, I want you to draw a stick figure of yourself. Just a quick stick figure drawing. I know some of you might have done that in square one already, but go ahead and do this in square two. Now, did this come out better than the first drawing? It likely took less time than the first one did. Which one's better? Is one more or less accurate? of a version of you? Is one inherently looking nicer and saying that this is indeed you? Is there something beyond all of this that's going to say, yes, one is me and one is not me? Or are they both not you? Or are they both are you? We'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. In square 3, I want you to draw a chair. Just go ahead and draw a chair. Might be the chair you're sitting in now. It might be a chair in your favorite classroom. It might be your living room chair that you so enjoy, or a stool. Maybe it's got 3 legs, maybe it's got 4, maybe it's got back, maybe it doesn't have back, maybe it's got arms, maybe it doesn't. All of these things might contain some notion of what it is to be a chair for you. Now, I want you to add someone with the chair. To do a quick little doodle of somebody with the chair. Question I have for you now that is done. Maybe it's done. Should be done. Maybe it's done. It'll be done by now, right? If not, you can pause it and there. Now, is that person sitting in the chair, or are they next to the chair? I said to just draw somebody with the chair, but generally speaking, half or more of you drew somebody sitting in the chair. Why? Why would you draw somebody in the chair? The answer is because that's what a chair is for. That what makes it a chair is that somebody sits in it, that it contains something, right? That this quality of chairness is that somebody sits in it. Maybe you didn't draw it because it was too awkward or hard, but most of you at least thought about this, right? That there's this idea of chairness that may or may not be connected with your actual drawing of a chair. Now in your final square, I want you to draw something real. Something really real. Something really, 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 really real. I want you to draw something that you could convince your neighbor, the next person you see, is in fact real. Now you might need to pause this video for 20 to 30 minutes while you think about it, or 2 or 3. But right, what is real and how does this come about? How are you going to do all of that? Now, I don't want you to blame your inability to draw something real on art. After all, art can in fact convey what's more real than the actual world around you. Now, I know you might disagree with this idea, and I'll show you why that's not the case in a moment. But again, this idea of what is real, maybe you even want to do a screenshot of this in your dialogue and show everybody. Right, here's who I am. Here's my drawing of myself. Or right, here's something real, and how that's going to move forward within all of that. Right. Art can sometimes show something that's more real than the rest of the world by itself. If you look at one of the most famous sculptures of a man, Michelangelo's David, it is really not good in a lot of ways. Now it's seen as the typical great example of what a man looks like, etc. But if you actually looked at it, if you paid attention to this statue, it doesn't match. It doesn't line up. If you saw a person who looked like this walking around, you'd kind of do a double take. You'd be like, something's not right about that person. Because, first of all, his upper body and his head are way too big for him and his proportions. His head is way too big overall. But again, his legs and everything continues to look smaller. Even his hands, his right hand is bigger than the left. And the muscles that are in his hand and around are just enlarged beyond what it would be typical, let's say. Also, his eyes, his right eye is looking one direction, while his left eye looks, out to the left. They're not looking in the same sort of way. And so you would think that there's something also off on this way. Now, it's not as if that this was all done by accident. It's not like he started when, oh, I'm halfway down and, oh no, I got to do the legs. Let me just make them smaller, or anything else to that effect. This off proportion was done because the sculpture was supposed to be up really high, and people looking down or looking up at it from below, the proportions look right. The artist was showing something as more real based upon making it less real. Right? The fault in the art makes the art better, and that's kind of the way that it's supposed to be. Now, other art does this too. There's meanings found in all sorts of art that try to show you what is real beyond what is simply just the normal thing that you would see. Religious art is probably the easiest way to see many of this in, because lots of little things are added in there, other little details to try to show one thing or another. Right here, what you see is an icon of the Annunciation, where the Archangel Gabriel announces to Mary that she will indeed be the mother of Christ, of God, and carry that in her womb, etc. And you're going to notice that there's a lot of brightness wrapped up within these images, right? Gabriel looks like he's running to announce this, while Mary's hands are open, kind of receiving a blessing that he is kind of launching out at her, very much within all of these sorts of details. Mary is also shown here holding a yarn spindle, kind of showing that this was in fact her task while she was in the temple, right? That she was preparing the veil within all of that before her betrothal. This color, even that of scarlet that she's holding, is that of divinity, and wrapping that up, and that she's wrapped and clothed within all of this. She's sitting up on a pedestal to show, not that she sat up on pedestals, but again, that she is elevated. The stars around her garment each have notions of her ever virginity wrapped up within all of this, right? That there's all sorts of blessings and added little details within here that are there because it's showing what's more real again, right? This idea that there's something beyond just what an actual depiction of somebody would look like. You would add on to this idea too that the proportions seem a little odd within this image as well. Some art, right, regular way that you would look at things would be through linear perspective, right? That the foreground is bigger than the background, right? As things vanish away. Some perspectives try to even this out a little bit more. But what you actually have here is what's known as reverse perspective, that things get bigger the farther in you get that. And this becomes a very typical thing of a lot of icons, right? That your life is more full in Christ the farther in you go, that the icon is more real. In fact, that it's looking at you instead of you, it. And this becomes kind of the images and the ideas kind of wrapped up within all of that. And again, different meanings are added in here, and there's subtleties and varieties within different pieces of art that show the same event. You can also have a very similar idea within other cultures' art as well. Religious art often shows this of one variety or another. Here we have a very common sort of bust of Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, and Buddhist art does this sort of extra meanings and things too. You'll notice again, very much similar to that of Gabriel and Mary, the perspectives of the eyes being bigger than the mouth, right? That you're taking in more than you are saying and you're producing, that you're being more observant than you are connected. But probably what you notice more within this bust of the Buddha is his ears. It's not that he had gauges in his 20s and then regretted it later and kind of is left within, very long droopy ears. There's this idea that your ears continue to grow and that old people have big ears. And therefore, to have large ears doesn't just mean that you listened to the world around you, but that it shows that you're wise. And so in very much the case of Southeast art, especially religious art, you're going to have important people having sort of extra large ears to try to show that they are indeed wise, that there's this extra blessing that they had as well. Now again, it's not that Siddhartha had large ears, but again, you're showing what's more real by changing what is there, and that this becomes this sort of idea wrapped up within all of that. So this becomes kind of the aim of philosophy as well, right? We want to approach what is real and address this. We read here that it is the duty of us to attain the knowledge of which we are produced to the greatest, and to win the vision of the good, and to scale that ascent. This is what Plato is encouraging us to do through the story here that he's sharing. Sometimes, all right, we might try to see beyond the shadows that are familiar and look outside of this. The cave, he says, this is difficult, painful, and one may face derision from the men who fight one another for these shadows, right? That this is this sort of challenge. This is why we can't kind of just stick with the fashion of the day if we want to learn what it is to be a philosopher. If we want to become one of these great thinkers, we have to step beyond what is just comfortable instead of fighting over shadows to try to talk about what is real. And so this is kind of the move of what we're supposed to be doing and expecting to do moving forward. So Plato encourages us to do just this in his work, The Cave. Here we're going to understand what is really real and try to move on beyond that, that this is indeed the aim and scope of philosophy. Now, in The Cave, he says that we should picture men dwelling in a sort of subterranean cavern with a long entrance open to the light of its entire width, right? So our first thing is to think about all this. And then we need to picture men dwelling in, having their legs and necks fettered from childhood so that they can remain always in the same spot, able to look forward only, and prevented by fetters from turning their heads. So you're stuck in this cave, and you are stuck to look only at this wall that you cannot look away. Picture further, he says, the light from a fire burning higher up at a distance behind them, between the fire and the prisoners above them, a road along a low wall which has been built. And so the exhibitors of a puppet show have a partition that they can always be moving their puppets, right? So you've got the lights behind you and all you can see is the shadows of this puppet show, right? That this becomes all you know. Now, of course, this would be a horrific thing to do to anybody, but imagine that somehow you found yourself, stuck from birth only seeing shadows. That this is your entire life. You've never seen the source. You've never seen anything else. Right? If this is all you've ever known and all you've ever seen, then you're going to see the shadows doing things, and you're going to attribute the shadows agency, that they're in fact doing all of this, right? That they're carrying the objects, that they're interacting with one another, right? That these men would talk to one another about what you saw, right? What do you see? Right? Oh, this person's doing this, that person's doing that. You would name the objects, right? You're going to say this object here is this and that. You wouldn't just say it's all mere shadow, but you would give it some sort of reality. And if you hear something, you would believe it from the shadows, because you would think that that's who said it, that the shadows themselves were giving value and discussion and engaging with one another. Again, this is all you've ever known and what you see. Now, this is a great start, but Plato moves us farther than this. Plato makes us stop and think, what if one of them gets free? What if somebody is broken out of this cave and they've gone out into the regular world? Let's assume that they're able to physically do all of this, right? This is all an allegory anyways. Question is okay, would anyone believe what he's seeing? If his entire life all he's ever seen is shadows, and here you are out in the wider world and you see color, would you believe it? How would you move forward with this idea? How could you explain to anybody what the real world was like? Since none of them have ever experienced color and depth and the breeze, and all of these other things that the real world has. And he asks a very pointed and serious question also. Do you want the real world? Would you resist it? Would you push back against it? You're used to darkness, and this is far too bright. It's going to be uncomfortable. Right? Coming across these ideas are going to be something you might very well resist, even though it's true. You might be happier to live in the shadows. In fact, he says that many people would choose to endure anything rather than to live such a life. That you want to avoid the real world. Right? Now, again, you may or may not agree with this. This might be you, and you might say yes, but again, maybe in the dialogue and discussion later, right? Why do you think somebody would resist the real world? Or pause and ponder that yourself. Do you always want what's real? Or a lot of the times you're perfectly happy with what you know and perceive? Have you ever been told about somebody who did something well before you met them, and it changes how you see them? And you might not like that, and you're probably happier before you found out this monstrosity. Maybe it's ultimately good. It's, after all, what's real, but it might change who you are and how you see that person, and you might say, you know, I was actually much better before knowing that, right? So these sorts of ideas might be there. So again, why or why not we want to take the real or just what's around us and what we see? After all, what's the point, right? This is what's being asked here. Actually, the dialogue's Socrates saying all this, not, but Plato's the one recording it, so we can kind of give voice to both, and we'll address that more next time. He says, if you assume that the ascent and the contemplation of things above is the soul's ascension to the intelligible region, you will not miss my surmise, since that is what you desire to hear. Plato, Socrates, here actually calls Glaucon and you, the reader, to move beyond your understanding of what only appears to be reality, and to understand the depths of reality itself. That this is where we need to move for, right? That this is the point of philosophy, is to move ourselves into what is real, and not just what we're comfortable with. Ultimately, we need to turn our attention to higher things. It says our present argument indicates that the true analogy for the indwelling power of the soul and the instrument whereby each of us apprehends it is that of an eye which could be converted to the light from the darkness, except by turning the whole body, right? Here you need to move your entire perspective. You can't just expect to kind of glean any sort of greater understanding. And so the organ of our knowledge must be turned around from the world of coming together with our entire soul, right? We need to turn our whole perspective and encounter something that's different and hard and conflicts with our own ideas. Like the scene in a theater, he says that the soul is able to endure this contemplation of essence of the brightest region of being. And this is what we say is good, do we not? Right? That this becomes a good thing, that this is our aim, and this is towards what is ultimately the most real, and therefore what we should be putting our perspectives on. And so this is, again, part of the aim of what we're going to do with philosophy, is to try to understand what's real, what's beyond just what's kind of there, understand what an essence of an idea might be, or the essence of things and the nature of reality, and all of that. And we're going to hopefully have a couple of dozen of great thinkers helping us walk through that as we go through this semester. So hopefully you're all doing well with this, and I'll end up talking to you guys later on.